Chava, is everything in order? Good afternoon to all. It's today, Saturday afternoon, June 12 in Israel, or Tuesday 15 in Latin America, when we're going to be transmitting this event. I'm Shlomo Slutsky. I'm a journalist and a documentarist from Argentina. And since 1976, I'm a concerned Israeli citizen, very concerned. This concern has made me participate in several political events in Israel, always in favor of peace. I'm to the left. And these last years, I have been working with the movement J-AmLat, which is formed from Latin American Jews in Israel and in Latin America. And we're in favor of peace between Israel and Palestine. And we're committed to democracy, human rights, and social justice in Israel and wherever we live. Today, in this meeting, we're going to be able to be together in the organization of this event with our friends in SAFTA, Meretz, and Young Meretz in Argentina, with the journal Periódico Nuevación, and with Casa de Cultura Rosa Robota. This is a group of organizations who share the same values, and we've decided to organize this meeting, and we are going to be transmitting it at a better time for them, which will be on Tuesday. Here, we're very pleased to have two representatives from Omdim. Omdim Beyachad, or Standing Together, is a name that shows its commitment to a society which is in Israel and has these contradictory narratives with social differences, with discrimination, and other topics that give us that takes ourselves. Is it really possible to have everyone be standing together? Our panelists today are Dani Flic, who will speak in Spanish from Argentina. Sali Abed, whom we have seen more than once in different interviews on TV or organizing or directing protest movements in perfect Hebrew. She will be speaking in Hebrew, but will have the simultaneous interpreting that Heidi Sevilla will be doing from the United States. Whatever Sally says in English, you will hear it in Spanish. And well, you're going to miss hearing her beautiful Arabic. If you have any questions or comments for those of you who will hear us on Tuesday, what we'll be able to do is that you're invited to write your questions in the chat, and you should add your email address. In this way, we will be able to reply to your questions, even if it's next week. So Dani, Sally, or ourselves will take care of that. At the end of this meeting, we're going to give a very important announcement, which will only take us 2 minutes. But we hope that it will make all of you think and move into action. Well, after this introduction, we're going to let Dani Flic to speak. Excuse me, Shlomo, just for all of the people who are here right now, if you want to listen in Spanish, you have to go down to the interpreting area and pick Spanish. If you want to switch into English and Spanish, you can do that. So when Sally will speak, we'll be interpreting her into Spanish, and you'll be able to hear her in Spanish. So just go into the Spanish channel. Thank you, Chava. So this also gives me the chance to introduce Chava, who's in Mexico. He's working with all the technical issues. So what I was telling you, I want each one of you to tell us in your own words, what is Omdim Beyachad? And that you introduce your colleagues. So Sally, you're going to introduce Dani, and Dani is going to introduce Sally. And we want you to tell us where it was that you met Where was your point of encounter? So any of you, either of you can start. You can decide whoever wants to start. Well, I'm going to begin by introducing Sally. Sally, I met her when she joined Omdim Beyachad. She started first working in Omdim Beyachad. She had returned from her studies in the United States, and she started working in the area of fundraising and fundraising. I think that the first or second time that we met, I was so impressed. I was very impressed because she's very amiable and also because of her intelligence. And I have had the opportunity of seeing her throughout all these years. And she became as a member of the Secretariat. And I've seen all her work in the movement, and she's one of the movement's most important militants. And I always tell her, whenever I hear her speak, I get even more excited than the last time I heard her. Well, well, I thought that I should first introduce Sally, and now I'll talk about Omdim Beyachad. Omdim Beyachad is a movement to the left. It's a Jewish Arab movement. It started at the beginnings of 2015 in response to the racism that was becoming even more violent in the Israeli society. The first appearance of the movement was a demonstration in Jerusalem under the slogan Omdim Beyachad. We're united together, standing together, or we're here together. That's the idea of standing together. Arabs and Jews were standing here together. And little by little, we started developing our mission, seeking cooperation and sharing as Jews and Arabs against the racist situation. And then we developed into a more global vision that's including tasks. Well, our task is to be able to build a popular leftist movement based on three pillars. One pillar is to end the occupation and to have a fair resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that will be based in equality, in the right to independence of both peoples. The second column is to promote democracy in Israel, promote equality between Jews, Arabs, Jews, Palestinians, both at the individual level or at the national level. And our third column is social justice. In Omdim Beyachad, we define ourselves as a socialist movement. So, Sally, would you like to start to speak now?
Well, I'm always in awe, Danny. Thinks that anything that I say is exciting or of any importance. I hold so much of him, and he's one of these very extremely rare people who are revolutionizing things without even without even taking the credit for doing that. He is creating a space for young minds and young activists like myself to actually express ourselves, and he creates this space for us to actually feel like we have something to contribute. When he really, I'm always surprised that I have something to add to him. Dani, I have so much appreciation of him. I think he talked about the 3 pillars of standing together, and he is one of the main pillars of the theory of change and of really how we really have built this movement. And we take so much of him. He is such a valuable, source of information and of thinking, and he just helps us really frame things. Dani, I can't even describe how much you're appreciated. Honestly, I'm always in awe when I hear you talk about me like that. I'm like, what? So thank you. Standing together, it's everything that Dani talked about, but I really want to talk about it maybe a little bit more from my perspective. When we talk about Arab-Jewish partnership, it's really much beyond, I think, a lot of the traditional left in Israel. When it talks about Arab-Jewish partnership, it talks about Jewish solidarity towards Arab citizens of Israel, Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel, and it's the struggle for equality, and it's the struggle to end the occupation. And it really is stuck there without really acknowledging the need to really build something that is much more holistic and much wider collaboration. I am not only Palestinian, I'm also a woman. I'm a young woman who lives in Israel. I have many other aspirations. I have many other areas of interest, and I have many other struggles. And what standing together is for me is really a place, it's a political home that empowers me, not just as Palestinian, not just as an Arab, but as a citizen, as a person. And that is very powerful, and it really is not taken, it should not be taken for granted, in a sense that the Palestinian youth in Israel has never really been able to engage the Palestinian youth. The Israeli left has never been able to engage the Palestinian youth beyond the struggle against the occupation and for peace and equality. And for that, we obviously will talk more about that, but it's important for me to add to what Dani said about the movement from my perspective.
I wanted to ask you, it's all very present in our minds right now, what happened in May. We're talking about a couple of weeks ago. So I wanted to hear what you have to say, your analysis regarding what happened in May. Talking about the confrontations in Gaza, and also what happened in Israel and in the border.
You're asking both of us?
And
Then.
yeah, yes, I want to hear both of you, unless you have the same position. So
Probably not. So.
Well, now we'll speak the other way around. So Sali, please, you start. Sali, please go first.
My analysis of what happened. Wow. I think that what happened really was, in a sense, expected, but at the same time, many of the reactions on the streets were not expected and actually unprecedented. And I think we're going to take credit here, Dani, for for standing together, for really doing a lot of the work for making it happen, for making that reaction, that unprecedented reaction happen. What happened is, a lot of the people talk about intercommunity violence in mixed cities, in Jewish cities, and I really refuse to call it intercommunity violence. Most of the violence really was not between Jewish citizens or residents of Lud or Yafa or Haifa. It was really Haifa, sorry, and it really was, outside organized violence from settler groups, Jewish groups, as well as, Arab youth who are usually as well were either going to other cities and just looting, even though I really don't like to compare between the two levels of violence. That happened, it's a ticking bomb. A lot of the public was very, very surprised, but we have coexistence. And it really is an illusion that we really need to start handling, and we start to find solutions. Coexistence is not something that we want. We don't want to coexist. We don't want to exist separately while we are, as Palestinians, enduring systematic oppression as Palestinians, as Arabs, and while Jewish youth are also experiencing, systematic poverty and education that really infuses them with a lot of the racism and the incitement against the Arab Palestinian society in Israel. And we refuse that kind of illusion of coexistence, and we never actually thought that it occurred, and that's why we always work towards peace, equality, and social justice. As of the escalations that happened in between, Hamas and the Israeli government or the Israeli army. I don't like to give analysis of that. I think a lot of people give a lot of reasons of why it happened, and a lot of people give conspiracy theories of why it happened. And I really don't like to go there, in a sense that I can only say that the situation that we are in at the moment, none of what happened was out of the blue. We are in a place of sustained occupation. We are in a place of sustained blockade on Gaza. We are in a situation of constant insecurity for Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in Israel. And the illusion that any of this is actually contributing to our security as people who live in this area is just false. And the reaction that happened, standing together, was actually able to mobilize thousands of people in hundreds of places around Israel, around the very, very simple notion that the majority of the people that live here are not benefiting from this situation, are not benefiting from the escalation, are not benefiting from the bombings, and that we are all, in fact, in favor of freedom, of security, and of peace for everyone that lives here. So that's one side that I really want to talk about, which is the unprecedented reaction of Arabs and Jews in Israel after a very, very violent wave of attacks between the different people. And despite that, people actually went and showed amazing solidarity and they actually embraced Arab-Jewish partnership, which did not happen in previous years. After the ceasefire happened, thousands of people marched in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem against the occupation. That never happened before. So there's happening there that is very, very, very special. It's very small. We don't think that, we're not thinking now that everyone is completely agreeing with the messages that we are holding, but the fact that it did happen, that it was legitimized, does say a lot about the change in collective consciousness in the way that we are perceiving things as a society. I also want to talk about the fact that within the Palestinian society in Israel, we are also seeing kind of awakening, a political awakening, where we are no longer accepting the narrative of Arab Israelis of erasing our connection to the Palestinian people and our connection to the Palestinian struggle and liberation. We are no longer accepting that narrative. That's disconnecting us from that. And what's beautiful is that standing together, a movement like Standing Together, which is no other movement in the history of the Israeli left has ever done, in my opinion, Dani, correct me, you know better than me, these kind of things, that was able to embrace the Palestinian national narrative within Arab-Jewish partnership in Israel and actually mobilize thousands with this kind of narrative. So it was obviously a very painful times for us, very hard. But there was such an unexpected, amazing spark of hope, of change that happened during this time.
Dani, do you want to add anything? I would just add 2 or 3 things. What happened in May was a combination of processes that came from a long term, the occupation, the lack of a way to go out for Palestinians, an exit route for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and in the territories. But this colonial movement within the occupied territories became deeper and deeper. And at the same time, this process that's taken years and years of this structural racism against the Palestinian citizens of Israel. That is the background. The spark, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but what really the spark that lit the fire was when the police entered the Alaska mosque. We have to take into consideration that such a serious decision to have the police enter the Alaska mosque, which as far as I recall is something that never happened before, that isn't a decision that the chief of police of the Jerusalem area decides, not even the chief of police. This is a decision made at the ministry area level. The Interior Ministry, which is in charge of the police, that he is really like the shield man of Benjamin Netanyahu. So Ohana doesn't make any decision that hasn't been approved by Netanyahu. So in this case, it's very clear that to Netanyahu, this was a way to generate a crisis that would offer him the possibility, according to him, to avoid the forming of this called government for change. And personally, I don't think this government for change is a government that's bringing hope. But for Benjamin Netanyahu, it did mean the end of his political career. And at a certain point in time, it seemed that he was being successful. Because in one of the worst moments of these confrontations, Bennett said that the government for change was something that was in the past. Well, we know that that was not true because either tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, Bennett is going to become the prime minister. But at that point in time, I think that there was a combination of the structural problems caused by the occupation, by structural racism, together with this spark linked to the short-term interests of Netanyahu of remaining in the government. And he was hoping for a 5th election where he had the hope to get that magic number of 61 in the parliament to be able to form a government, which he has not been able to do during the last 4 elections. Shlomo, you're muted. I wanted to comment something. When I was a militant of Ashomerat Zair in Argentina and the socialist Zionist movement in Argentina, Dani Flic is a bit younger than me, but he knows what I'm talking about. Back then, we had our own saying. Oh, in the Middle East, only peace is revolutionary, because peace is fundamental in order to have those social battles happening within Israel, but also equality was necessary to be able to reach this equality between the Arabs and Israelis and Jews in Israel. So I want to ask you, what is your position regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Okay, so we'll alternate. Now I'll start. As I stated, it's clear that the fight against the occupation and the colonial process of the settlements in the occupied territories and in Gaza, this is one of the key elements against which a popular leftist movement would be. Our idea is, as I said before, he froze, sorry. Yes, he's frozen. We're talking about the end of occupation and peace based in the equality of both peoples, the equality of both peoples to acknowledge and recognize the right to self-determination, independence, and equality. And again, the equality of individual rights and equality of collective rights, which is clear at this point in time that, and he froze again, sorry. Palestinians in the occupied territories have no civil rights, no political rights. And the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, they are suffering the consequence of all these years of structural racism. The peace in the Middle East or the peace in Palestine will be revolutionary if it's a peace based in this respect. The end of the occupation, the end of the settlements, and bringing in the equality of individual and collective rights. Regarding the political shape this must take, the idea of the right to the self-determination of both peoples, this is something that we have not made any decisions yet about what would be the institutional way to be able to put these principles in place. But I do believe that at this point in time, we're still far away from there. So first, we have to work in this fight against the occupation and promoting true peace. I have to say that it's not only that peace is revolutionary. I would add that the fair peace would be revolutionary in the Mideast. So Sally, I would like to ask you something. During decades, we got used to a situation where Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, they kept quiet because they were afraid of any consequences that they would be against them, or they were within the framework of Arab Palestinians, Hadash or something like that. Sometimes they did have the support of certain groups from the Jewish left. Omdim Beyachad, is it doing something new or different to this? Sally?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I do think that we are doing something different in a sense that we are really seeing, Hadash, I mean, we have very similar foundations to what Hadash attempted to do, which really is a socialist struggle. However, I don't think that it was advanced enough in its vision as well as in its methodology to actually organize people. I do think that let me get back. I just want to talk about the context of why I think we are doing that is different. I think that you talked about about the conflict, and you asked Danny about what he thinks about the conflict. And first of all, that's exactly, and Danny's answer was really very accurate in a sense that a lot of it is unknown, in a sense that we haven't even reached the point where we have a mature, functional left in Israel, a shared left in Israel that can actually envision, or not even envision, discuss, what can peace look like. I think we have lost the ability to envision what peace looks like, what fair, just solution to the occupation looks like. And that's exactly the very point that we are trying to do, which is insisting on the correlation between peace, equality, and social justice. There could not be an end to the occupation without fighting for an equal and just a society in Israel, and vice versa. There could not be ever an equality and social justice in Israel without ending the occupation. Forever interlinked, and they will never, we will never be able to advance equality and without advancing, a just solution. And the fact that standing together is insisting, is persistent in that message of advancing everything together. The fact that we are mobilizing Palestinian citizens of Israel while also advancing rights and trying to mobilize, yet not very successful, to mobilize other marginalized communities such as the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community, or the Ethiopian community, which are also victims of systematic racism in Israel. That is really very, very, very special. And the fact that we are doing that methodologically, and we are building a space for a different type of activism that really sees things different, is something that was not done before. I think that sorry, I wanted to say something else, but I don't want to go there now. Maybe you'll ask about it later. But we are doing something different, and we are advancing. We are creating a society that can envision peace, and a society that is, enduring inequality and enduring social injustices on all sectors, everywhere, cannot envision peace of other people. That's just not possible. It's not possible because you also cannot puts the responsibility of them envisioning liberating other people while they are facing a lot. They're facing poverty, and they're facing racism, and they're facing police brutality, and they're facing, they cannot afford housing, and they cannot afford the most basic things. You cannot mobilize people towards peace in Israel if they're just not living in a more equal, just society. And as a Palestinian, it was a very hard realization for me. But
Sally, when you think about what would the ideal be, let's say that there is a change in the next 10 years. What would that look like? Let's say 10 years, 20 years from now. What is the society that you would like to see?
I cannot tell you how it looks exactly. No, really, I'm not going to fall into that trap. So I'll tell you why. Because a lot of people talk about, one state, two state, right of return. And I do think that there needs to be an end to the occupation. I do think that everyone needs to live in freedom and in equality and security. I do think that we need to live in a place that is just, okay? If you ask me if it's one state or two state, or what were you going to do with the Palestinian refugees, I do think that there needs to be some kind of just solution. And when Dani talks about fair peace, I do think we also think about the Palestinians. If you're talking about the settlements in the West Bank, well, that's also really a question. These technical things, it's very hard for me to, I refuse to fall into that trap of actually talking about the technicalities of these things, because I do think that they are at the moment topics that are so much beyond what we are able to envision at the moment, unfortunately. I do insist on a just solution. I do insist on acknowledging my narrative as a Palestinian and acknowledging my history, acknowledging the Nakba. I do believe that Israel as a country, as a state, does need to acknowledge the injustices that it was founded on. And I do think that it needs, I always talked about, not always, but before I joined Standing Together, and really it was a very different narrative for me, where I really talked a lot about Jewish supremacy. But then you look at, non-white, female, poor Jews, and you start understanding that it's really not about Jewish supremacy here. And I just want to see something where this kind of narrative is dismantled, because not obviously the very direct and main victim are the Palestinian people of this narrative, this colonial settler narrative of that has a very, very large impact on Israeli actions and Israeli government actions. But I think the majority of the Israelis are also a victim of it. And what I see is a place where this kind of narrative is just dismantled. I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a better answer. I know that you want a better answer than this, maybe a more technical one. I can't hear the translation.
I can't hear him, he's muted.
Oh, okay.
He's muted, so no one. Yeah. What I want to say, that you feel a bit defensive. I wasn't asking you about the return of Palestinians, or if it's going to be a Jewish state. But basically, the definition regarding what justice is and what it means that there won't be any discrimination based on the origin of the individual. At least that's the country. As a concerned Israeli citizen, that's what is important to me. The solution, I know it's difficult to think of a solution, but at this point in time, Omdim Beyachad isn't talking either about two states or one democratic state, or you don't want to create those internal divisions. Dani, you wrote several books about social movements and policies and strategies for change. Could you tell us a bit, let's say 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you're going to write a book. What would you do to say if Omdim Beyachad was a success or not? Omdim Beyachad's model at this point in time is a model of creating a social movement that will be as broad as possible. Regard Omdim Beyachad's idea is to be a social movement, not a political party right now, because this is a time, not only in Israel, but everywhere, the political parties to the left that were political parties that promoted social justice. They had their own platforms, but they also had presence within the civil society. But there is division of labor. So you have political parties are working with electoral issues, and the civil society is working more with NGOs. NGOs that are very professionalized, and they depend on foundations or donations, and are not mobilizing people. The idea behind Omdim Beyachad was to fill up that vacuum between NGOs and the political parties that are becoming increasingly electoral machines. And the foundation is to combine the mobilization of organizations. And both things are combined because mobilization generates energies that can be organized afterwards. And organization is the foundation of being able to mobilize others in the future. Sali mentioned what happened and what Omdim Beyachad was able to do during the weeks of the war in Gaza and the violence in the confrontations. The presence of many places throughout the country where there were demonstrations, joint demonstrations with the solidarity between Jews and Arabs, the possibility to organize in Tel Aviv a demonstration with 3,000, 4,000 people, which was the largest demonstration in a long time from the left. Yesterday, to be able to organize a demonstration against the expulsion of the Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah. This is the result of the organization during the throughout time. Our idea is to generate this mobilization, this organization that afterwards will establish the foundation for the possibility to create or to work with political parties so that political parties to the left can understand the strength of this other alternative. So at that point, I would say that then the model would be, paradoxically, would be the model from the right of Gush Emunim in the 80s and the 90s. They were never a political party, but they created a movement, sadly, a movement a presence out in the street that was very important, and that it did have an influence upon political parties, and it changed the Israeli society. So if you ask me what I would like to see 15 years from now, that we will be able to change the Israeli society in a way to be able to generate mobilization and awareness of an alternative of popular left in a country where, regrettably, the left has positions that aren't really to the left. They're truly far away from the needs and the interests, like Sally said, of big sectors of the population. On the other hand, or a left we have that has a moralist position. I don't know if you remember the TV program, The Muppets, that there were these two old little men who were sitting up in the balcony, and they were always like complaining about anything that was happening on stage. And they're just like trying to generate this political illusion. Our What we want is to be able to generate groups and coalitions to show that the great majority of the people living here share the same interests. And actually, the system that we have right now is only working in favor of two fundamental groups. One is the group of the elitist sectors of the settlers, Gush Emunim and their legacy. And on the other side, sectors from the economy that were benefited by the privatization of the resources, or this civil military combination, which is part of the foundation of the promotion of the sector of Hyatt. So these are the sectors that are really taking advantage of this neoliberal system that has characterizing Israel for the last years. So we are trying to go beyond that combination. The originality of Omdim Beyachad is that it's against this popular left that is presenting itself as a moralist left. 15 years from now, when you write that book, I'm going to remember, I'm going to buy it, and you have to autograph it for me. I want to ask Sal, Shlomo, if we meet 15 years from now, that will be good, because at our age, 15 years is really very optimistic. Wait, in order to read your book, I'm willing to live till beyond 80. So I want to ask Sally, for a long time, even right now, there has never been an Arab party that is part of the coalition. Now we have Raham Party, which is the unified Islamic list. And they're going to be part of Lapid Bennett coalition. Has everything been solved? You have Jews and Arabs together and everyone is in peace and all that? Sally, what do you have to say?
No. But we're talking about, a right-wing party that happens to be Arab that joined, a coalition of, I don't know how to describe the government that will be formed. And it's a right-wing government that just happens to be an Arab government, an Arab party. Sorry. I'm not dismissing it in the fact that I just saw a poll from last week that showed that 31% of the Arab public in Israel, the Arab Palestinian society, is actually in favor of what's happening and in favor of this party of Ram joining the government. So I don't want to dismiss it, because I am obviously not part of this 31%, but there's obviously a large portion, almost a third of my society, who thinks this is a legitimate, good thing to do. We can talk about why it has such a great support that I think is not real. It's not realistic why these people actually approve of this. We can talk about that. We can talk about how, Arab Palestinians are, they are seeking some kind of legitimacy, and finally, there's some kind of legitimacy. However, I don't think that our path to that, to reclaiming legitimacy and reclaiming our story and our part, is through a right-wing government. That it's just, I don't think it's constructive to the type of story that we are trying to advance. But again, I am secular. I am a socialist. And Ram does not represent me in that sense. It also is exactly doing what I talked about before, that it is disconnecting us from the Palestinian narrative, which is something that I don't think is going to be constructive towards peace. I really don't think so. Yeah, that's my answer. I don't like to dismantle it completely. I don't like to delegitimize it completely, because obviously there is some kind of support for it. It doesn't represent me, and I don't think personally, as well as a lot of people around me, I don't think that it is constructive to peace in general, and to more specifically to reclaiming our story, which is integral to the peace process.
I wanted to ask you both. In the left, Israeli left, during a long time, you had the left or Machaneh Shalom. They were talking about external pressure from the United States, from Europe, from other countries. They were a hope. They're going to pressure, and that would have the government from the right or whichever, it will force them to reach peace with the Palestinians and work with the territories. What do you see? How do you see this issue of the possibility of the foreign pressure, external pressure upon Israel? Benny Penken, he was Mexican. Sorry, he was in the parliament for minutes. When they were talking about the pressure, foreign pressure, he would give the example of the Spanish under the dictatorship of Franco. They said that their index finger was smaller, because they would always hit the table and say, this year Franco will fall. And they say the Israeli left also had a shorter index finger, because they were always hitting on the table saying, this year the foreign pressure will succeed. I want to think about certain moments when there was external pressure, but in general, rather what there was were processes that began within the region, and then they received certain foreign support, because the United States, the European Union, Russia, China, who are the most important foreign actors, they would work in this in favor of their own interests, and not because they have a commitment towards a just peace or the rights of peoples. in this sense, of course, the situation will be better when in the United States, Biden is the president instead of Trump. But we know that Obama never did anything with his rhetorical commitment to a Palestinian state. He never translated that into true policies that would pressure Israel to go out from the occupied territories. In Europe, increasing xenophobia and the limitations of the EU's uh, resources and the fact and xenophobia and the fact that certain European countries like the Czech Republic, Polonia, others, they are involved with, they are have communist, they have parties that are to the right and they're similar to the Likud. And they would be the natural allies with that right wing. That would make it very difficult to generate a European policy that would become effective pressure. I believe that if one places one's hopes in foreign pressure, that's just a way to remove your responsibilities. And the possibility of having any influence upon foreign pressure is minuscule. What we need is to have progressive voices throughout the world who are demanding of just peace. And that in each of all those countries, for example, here in Latin American countries, we have them come up demanding a fair peace, or that Latin American countries would get together and bring an initiative demanding a peaceful and just solution in the Middle East, and then the other countries would support them, that would be positive. But us, like Omdim Beyachad, our fight is within Israeli society. We're not looking towards the international community. Of course, we are in touch with progressive sectors in the international community in order to coordinate our efforts to be able to reach a fair peace. Right now in England, also in sectors in the United States that are close to Bernie Sanders, and also in initiatives like J-AmLat. Just, well, on our way to conclude, my last question would be, Danny, you spoke about something that our audience should, the audience that's right now here and will be here next week. And there's millions of Jews throughout the world, and also assume that there's millions of Palestinians throughout the world, that they also believe what Omdim Beyachad believes. They want a fair peace, they want democracy, they want human rights, social justice, etc. But what is the role that you believe that the people who do not live in Israel, what is their role? But they care about what's happening. Sali, I'm sure that you also have to go also outside to other countries. There's probably many people, well, here we have Latin Americans, Jews, and probably also many Palestinians. What is the role that the people who live in different places of the world have within Omdim Beyachad? Do they have a role? Can they give an opinion? What, Sally?
I'm not sure about if they can give an opinion. If honestly, I think that an opinion beyond the very, the very human demand for everyone that lives everywhere. I don't think there's an opinion. I do think that there's an increased engagement, global engagement, especially with the Palestinian narrative. There really is an increased engagement. There's increased solidarity, and people are really trying to engage and learn more about what's happening, about the occupation, about the blockade, about the refugees. And I think that the role of the people outside, maybe Danny, you can talk more about the Jewish community outside, but in the outside of Israel. But I think in general, the main thing that people can do is really engage in an informed manner. I think a lot in a place where we have so much information, a flood of information from everywhere, and we have the game of algorithm, and everyone lives in their own bubble, but they're like flooded with information. But at the same time, it's it's a very specific type of information that is provided to them and fed to them all the time. And I see a lot of polarizations and a lot of polarized opinions, even from Palestinian solidarity, activists around the world. So the one thing that I would say is really engage. I don't agree with people engaging. I urge people to engage. I want people to engage. I want people to share information. I want people to read, but I want it to be informed engagement. And one of the things that I'm saying that is that because I do see a lot of gaps. I do see a lot of polarized opinions that are not wholesome. And one of the things that it does, for example, is that people don't know that we exist. For example, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, and that we are inside, and we are probably not, okay, I don't want to say, we are one of the most important, essential parts of this process. We are Palestinians who are citizens of Israel. And that's such a and the fact that we are not part of the international conversation about this issue is really problematic, in a sense that it's missing such an important piece of the puzzle. That's one thing. The other thing is our struggle as, our Arab-Jewish partnership within Israel, the efforts to actually create a binational narrative towards peace within Israel. That is something that is also overlooked within the international community, something that we are really trying to change, I think. And that's what Dani talked about, us engaging internationally to collaborate and to share, for shared learning experiences with other movements in the US, in the UK, and in other places. We really case study, how things are, and try to apply it to our very complex reality. But we also want to engage. I think it's very important for us to engage with people so they understand what we are trying to do here, because I think our attempt to create the story that we are creating as an Arab-Jewish partnership, it's not just that. It necessitates a creation of a binational narrative within Israel, which is, I think, some kind of a start to really start envisioning what peace might look like between Palestinians and Israelis. So I think I'm going to be very selfish and say, inform yourself about us, about Palestinians in Israel, about our efforts as Palestinians and Jews, citizens of Israel, and what we are trying to do. I think we also have the responsibility maybe of doing the same, of, making sure our efforts and our information and our work is accessible in other languages, in mostly English. What we are trying to do, we really, during these times, we tried talking and to many media outputs and outlets, and with amazing platforms such as yourself, because we do want people to inform themselves with what we're doing here.
Dani? I believe, just like Sally says, something important is information flowing, being able to know, to be informed, to be in communication. That's something important. The second point would be to bring voices to be heard, voices that are able to connect of both people. No, and they're not putting the narrative of one people in front of the narrative of the other. And this is a task that has to do with this concept of a fair, just peace that talks about the right to independence and security of both peoples. And also maybe regarding Latin America, in contrast to the United States, the EU, China, Russia, Latin American countries don't have any imperial interests in the East. So they would be able to be the spokespeople for positions that aren't linked to the position of the powers, but are linked rather more to the interests of general groups. Yeah, well, and now he froze, but I had the chance to say everything he said. He says, I wasn't frozen. Yes, you were for a few seconds. It's very hot, so we freeze in order to reduce our temperature. There's some people here who want to ask a few questions. So Shlomo, can we have questions from the people here? We still have 10 minutes, maybe. Jose Hamra wanted to ask a question. Thank you. Dani and Sally, it has been so enlightening what you have shared, specifically what Sally stated. You're looking to create a society that's united and is able to project peace for others, not for only the oneself and not for their own people only. This takes me to bring this to land it. Peace isn't just the lack of war. We have to build a deeper, a more profound peace. It's not only not having war. It's not the absence of war what would lead you to peace. Oh, they can't hear him in Spanish. No. Sorry, he wasn't. You and me were the only ones hearing what he said. Yes. Okay. Quickly, because we don't have that much time. No, no, no. We have to envision a society that can imagine and see peace for other peoples. I think that's what's fundamental. And that leads us to think that peace is not only the absence of war. There's more deeper things in the essence of path and movements such as Omdim Beyachad, which is leading to a different kind of peace and not a kind of peace that we're used to think about it. So my question is this peace you're talking about the national narrative focused towards peace. Where would the national narratives fall there? That would be the Jewish narrative, the Palestinian narrative, the Zionist narrative. What happens with these narratives? I believe that the idea is to give space to narrative, to the national narratives. What Sali is saying is that one of the things that must be done is to acknowledge the Israeli Palestinians narrative as part of the Palestinian narrative without them stopping being Israeli citizens. This is a concept that maybe for us, because we're from Latin America, the idea of the popular left would imply acknowledging the place of each national. The problem is when the national narratives become nationalistic narratives. And national narrative could be a place where you can acknowledge the national narrative of the other, a bridge, and build bridges. But also the national narrative can be the foundation to deny the national narrative of the other. So Beyachad is saying we can't say that there's no national narratives. I'm saying our position is not minimalist or simplistic, that is presenting ideas of free radicals that are just floating in space. We are talking about people who are socially situated with their own identity, with multiple identities, with national identities. And one of the older identities is a national identity that is based in the idea that all other national identities and narratives are equally valid and have the same right to express themselves and to manifest themselves, and not look at national narratives based in the idea of a national supremacy.
I
Any others?
want to say that I agree with Danny. We are trying to create space for narratives. I do think that during the process, a lot of many parts of the narratives from both sides will necessarily be challenged. They will be challenged. Within the Palestinian national narrative, there is some kind of narrative of, for example, the older traditional one of decolonization, and the newer one, there's also parts of Islamization of the narrative of, the resistance. Within the Zionist narrative, for example, there is, a lot of the parts of the Zionist narrative also talks about, delegitimizing my identity as a Palestinian, like it necessarily cannot coexist. So a lot of it will be challenged, but I don't think that's destructive of these challenges. I just think that they will necessarily just evolve into something that can actually work, and I think that's absolutely fine. It's very important for us to change stories, because the stories that we have at the moment obviously don't work. So
Thank you. One more question and we'll conclude. Does anyone have another question? So, Roberto, you wanted to ask something? Yes. My question is for both of you. What do you see regarding re-education? No, what is your view of the re-education of Palestinians from Hamas, that from its basis does not acknowledge the existence of Israel? What do you see regarding this? They're going to answer, but I think that exactly what they presented I did ask you.
I will answer that question once you ask at the same question, what are we going to do about the education in Israel that is raising a settler colonial mentality within Israelis? So if you ask at the same time, then maybe I'll answer you. Yeah, I don't think this question really acknowledges the symmetry. So I don't know. Danny, if you want to answer, by all means.
What I believe, this is an asymmetric, non-symmetric situation. There's a country, the Jewish people, was able to instrumentalize its right to self-determination, and the Palestinian people did not achieve that right. So to try to present or propose a symmetry in the narrative beyond what Sali also said, which is true, that there are certain sectors in Israeli society that truly believes in the Israeli supremacy and denies completely any right to the Palestinians. But from the political point of view, I do not believe that that really reflects the number of people. We do know that many Likud voters are able to accept the idea of a Palestinian state. But if you look at the political system, more than 40% are denying the Palestinians having a right to have a state. That's from the political system. That's one issue. The second issue is that when it seemed that following the agreements between Rabin and Arafat, there was going to be a demilitarization of the conflict, and there was certain progress going towards agreements, the narratives were also starting to change. But many times when there's no other choice, when there's no other alternative, the narrative is the only place where there can be opposition. So I am more concerned about the way in which the settlements are erasing the possibility of having peace than the way textbooks are erasing the possibility of peace, because the settlements are attacking peace much more and stronger than textbooks. In Israel, we have the experience that textbooks in school are changed very frequently. So I really believe that we have to keep in mind who and where are all these obstacles. And nowadays, the responsibility of the Israeli government for the next 20 years is more important regarding what it's doing in paralyzing the peace process, because the responsibility should be in the hands of the stronger party. The stronger party has more responsibility than the party that is less strong. I want to thank you. I want to thank Dani, Sali. Also, a great appreciation to Heidi, who was the one who allowed us to be able to hear and understand Sali. I want to thank Chava for helping us in the organization. But I also want to say something. I told you I was going to take 2 extra minutes to say something that has to do with action. Regarding my last question, the one about the role of Jews and Palestinians abroad and the people who concerned people, I want to say regarding Jews, that is why we created J-AmLat. We created to be a bridge among organizations like Omdim Beyachad and other organizations that have already participated in our events, together to a bridge with groups in Latin America, Spanish speakers and Portuguese speaking people. Sally mentioned about speaking above. We want people to know the different narratives, the narrative of peace, the fight for equality, for social justice, of many other organizations. We are listening to different organizations from Israel, and Omdim Beyachad is one of them. In order to be able to fulfill this task better and have more activities like the one from today, we've decided to create an NGO that is between Israel and Latin America. And this NGO will be established in Israel. We'll be able to become an institution, institutionalize ourselves, be more effective, be able to work more effectively, and be able to fulfill our objectives of peace and social justice and equality. So I'm asking all of you who want to join us in the forming of this NGO, both in Israel and abroad, please give us your information on the chat or send us an email to J-AmLat. Thank you very much, and we hope to be able to see you in future activities, be it our activities or other activities where your organizations participate. Shlomo Kutzali, Dani, write in the chat where we would be able to find you in social media, in web pages. Where can we follow you? My knowledge of social media is really Sally.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram.
Me puede...
Oh, I can send it. One moment, yes.
You can write your handle and your address in chat.
Yeah.
So thank you very much once again.
Oh, I send it. One moment.
You'll say
I cannot send it to everyone for some reason. No.
What you wrote. Chava says that he has your information and he'll send it to everyone. Yeah, he was speaking in Hebrew to you from the Spanish, so you couldn't hear him. So, מה שכתבת, אני יכולה. Se tienen que salir. Ah, no, bueno,